Jesus would often say, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Have faith in God and faith in me. Be not afraid."
I had this weight on me of these things that I did as a young man. You will be forgiven. You are my son. You are going to be free of this. There's nothing is too big for God, brothers.
So I was glad to see Cardinal Dolan here this morning. He's a piece of work, isn't he? I know him well now for many years, and I was at a meeting with him once when I was in New York. He was sitting next to me. He was complaining that he went to a doctor, and I says, "Yeah, what did he say?" And he says, "Well, he told me that I had to stay away from pasta and bread." And he says, "Oh," I says, "So what are you going to do to him?" He says, "I'm getting a new doctor." As only he could do. Don't follow that behavior, though. So the overall theme of your 15th Manup is on the way, right? It's on the front of, I hope you noticed it. On the way. On the way. We all are on the way. Every single one of us is on the way. What's happening on the way at any particular time is different for each of us. But we're all on the way. On the way to where? Listen, when all is said and done, we're on the way to heaven. It doesn't matter at the end, how many degrees you have and how successful you've been or not, or it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Because we're all on the way to heaven. And that when you're sitting here feeling fine, it's a nice thought. It's a nice intellectual thought. We all want to go to heaven, but not yet. Not exactly right now. We all crave for heaven, but we are, whether we like it or not. That's what we're on the way on. We're on that way. We're on that road. But that road has a lot of sections to it. And so I would ask you, as you came here today, what section of the road are you on? This on the road to Emmaus comes from the 24th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. In so many ways, it is a paradigm of the Christian life and the ultimate model of evangelization. The ultimate model. It kind of has like three movements to it. There's the way, there's a conversation, and then there's the table. And then there's the table. So we're all on the way, just like these guys, these two disciples, who were on their way actually back to Emmaus from where they came. They had left Emmaus and everything that Emmaus meant to them, right? And they had gone and they followed this teacher, Jesus of Nazareth, who gave them great hope. Their minds were stimulated, their hearts were burning as they heard him preach and teach and perform miracles. And I could imagine the days going by, and they were filled with such excitement that this is the one. This is the one. And then the bottom fell out. Boop, went away. The bottom completely fell out. And now they find themselves going back from where they came, which probably wasn't a very good place to begin with. Right? Going right back. Now they went back kind of disillusioned. Maybe they thought they were had, that they were misled. And as they're going on the way, kind of talking about this, the things that that had happened, and complaining and whining like we human beings do, someone begins to walk beside them. And he sees that that they are in like intense conversation. And he says to them, so what are you guys talking about? What are you guys talking about? There's only one other place in the gospel where Jesus, that I know of anyway, that Jesus actually intercepts himself into a conversation. The disciples, his apostles, were walking, because all of Jesus' public ministry really is a road to Jerusalem. There's only one thing that's going to happen in Jerusalem: his death and his resurrection. There's one long pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And they're on their way to Jerusalem, and the disciples are involved in a heated debate, and Jesus turns around to say, and what were you guys talking about and arguing about? He said that they were silent all of a sudden, because they were talking about who's the greatest, right? Who's the greatest? And someone over there shouted, Muhammad Ali. Who's the greatest, right? Jesus had just said to them that he predicted his suffering, his death, his passion, and it kind of went right over their head, you know? Went right over their head, and they were talking about who's the greatest. Who would sit on his right, who would sit on his left, you know, and all that type of stuff. Now these guys are walking on their way, and they're also engaged in a deep, intense conversation. And this guy appears, asks them, and they kind of get upset at him. They get upset at this guy who actually asked the question. And when he says, well, what are you talking about? And they says, well, are you like the only one? Are you blind? Like, what world do you live in? Are you the only one that doesn't know the things that happened? Right? It would be almost like if you said to me, yes, February was a disappointing month, and I said, well, why? And you said, well, you know, the Eagles and stuff. He says, what happened to the eagle? And he says, my God, you're from Philly, and you don't, like, who doesn't know what happened to the Eagles, not the bird? You would think I'm like, wow, so out of touch. But Jesus, or this guy who's walking with them, right, he doesn't get too razzle-dazzled. He says to them, so what sort of things? Tell me. And they began to tell him, you know, we had hopes that this Jesus of Nazareth, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, but at the end, you know what? It was all fake. None of it was true. At the end, he was executed, he was buried, and with that, into that tomb went all of our dreams and hopes too. What's so ironic about that story, as several of the post-resurrection stories, is that they are telling the guy to whom it happened to, and they don't recognize him. They don't see him. Because sometimes we could become such incredible navel gazers. You know what a navel gazer is? Have you ever navel gazed? Try it. So navel gazing that they could not see. They couldn't see. And then he began to begin little by little to connect their lives at that moment to the scriptures, to the Word of God, and how the Word of God was being fulfilled actually in the things that were happening. It's the same thing that happened to you and to me today, because we've been on the road. We've been on the road. And then you showed up here with whatever was in your heart, whatever was in your bags. You guys know. Maybe you're going through a great time and this is like an awesome time in your life. Or maybe this is one of the worst. Maybe you know what nobody else knows, that you got some bad news from the doctor. Maybe your finances have bottomed out. Maybe you had a fight with wifey last night. I don't know. I didn't. And I won't either. I don't know what's going to happen to you tonight, but I know what's going to happen to me. In that area, anyway. So I don't know when you were on the road and you came here, what was happening on your road. But I would invite you to bring that forth into your mind and heart. Because what's happening on the road is really important, actually. Because what's happening on the road is actually God's hand on your way to heaven. Even the tougher things. Even the things that cause us pain and suffering that, man, when that happens, you don't even understand it. And all you're left with is faith. Is faith. Someone gave me a little thing about 3 months ago that's been kind of like my mantra in the last 2.5 months. Very simple. It says, remember these 4 things. Remember these 4 things. Dolan had 6. I only have 4. Remember these 4 things. God can make a way. God will make a way. He is fighting your battles. Prayer is the best medicine. Trust his timing. Let that sink in. God will make a way. God is fighting your battles. Prayer is the best medicine. Trust his timing. And that's what this man, this mysterious man, in some way, shape, or form is trying to communicate to these guys who are really downcast. They're downcast. And then as he was ready to go, they asked him to stay. And when he picked up bread and broke it, then they recognized him. They recognized him in the breaking of the bread. He had broken bread with the apostles a few days before at the Last Supper. And he made that bread his very real presence. And his blood his very real presence. Body and blood, soul and divinity. Not a symbol, not a representation, but the very body and blood, soul and divinity of Christ. And it was there that they recognized them in the breaking of the bread. And from that moment on, they were never the same. The gospel writer tells us that their hearts were on fire, were burning. Their hearts were burning while he talked to them on the way. So as you've been on the road, your road, what has the Lord been talking to your heart throughout this day? What has he been saying? What has been entering your heart? Might be as a whisper. It might have been a little bit of a louder voice. It might have been one of those moments where you go, and it hits you like a ton of bricks. What has the Lord been saying to you in this particular segment today of your road? Think about that for a couple of minutes, because that's your takeaway. That's your takeaway. And we bring that, whatever it was, that the Lord spoke to your heart on this part of your road, of my road, our road, we will bring that to the altar but we will recognize him in the breaking of the bread.